Okay, good evening, everybody. Wednesday night is another halacha and Tanya. Last time we started, not the laws of Basel Chol, that we started before. But we were explaining last week, and we're going to learn this a few times, because once you get, so to speak, the hang of it, you understand, number one, what is a halacha question in the kitchen, and you'll be able to understand a little bit even how to answer the question. Not that you could answer the question without a lot of knowledge, but at least you understand what's going on. So we learned that you're not allowed to cook meat and milk, benefit, eat, and so on. But we said it doesn't only mean cooking meat, actual meat and actual milk. Cooking the taste of meat in milk or the taste of milk, the taste of in meat is also forbidden. Now, we discussed last time, and again, it's important to get it clear. Last time we learned that if a person cooks meat in a pot, so now there's taste of meat, there's meat taste absorbed within the walls of the pot. So even if the pot is clean, there's still meat taste absorbed within the walls of the utensil. So then if somebody is going to cook milk in that container that was used within 24 hours, so like we learned, it's a fresh taste of meat, they will be transgressing the sin of cooking meat and milk together, because there's a taste of meat absorbed within the walls of the pot. It's within 24 hours since the pot was used last. Therefore, it's a fresh taste of meat. Therefore, if you cook milk in that pot, milk includes anything dairy in that pot, the din is that is called meat and milk together. And therefore, the milk that you cook in the pot is not kosher because it has a fresh taste of milk. Now, of meat in the milk. Now, normally we learned it becomes nullified 1 in 60. But like we discussed last week, we don't know how much milk was absorbed within the walls of the vessel. Therefore, we have to assume, halacha says, that the entire wall is like meat. And you rarely have 60 times in what you're cooking in the pot, like the milk in the pot, against the taste of milk, of meat, the taste of meat that's absorbed within the pot. So therefore, if somebody takes a meat pot, clean pot, but was used that day for hot meat, and cooks something dairy in that pot, the food is treif and the pot is treif. If the pot is a kosherable pot, you can kosher it. If the pot is a non-kosherable pot, i.e., it's a coated frying pan, so because of the coating, the vessel is not a kosherable utensil. So if somebody took a meat frying pan that was used within 24 hours and made a cheese omelet in that frying pan, the omelet is treif, the pot is treif, you can't kosher the pot, you have to throw it out. If the pot is not coated and it's plain metal, so then you're able to kosher the pot. If you're able to kosher the pot, then you kosher the pot, but the food is treif. What happens, the same scenario, but the pot wasn't used for 24 hours for meat. So you took a clean meat pot. It was not used for 24 hours. Okay. And then you cook milk in it or dairy in it. It doesn't matter. So then the din is, because the taste absorbed within the walls of the pot is a blemished taste, called blemished, because it's after 24 hours. So therefore, the cheese, the dairy that you made in the pot is kosher, because that doesn't have a taste of meat and milk, because the taste of meat, because it's more than 24 hours absorbed within the utensil, is not really a meat taste. So therefore, if somebody took a pot that wasn't used for 24 hours and made dairy in it, the din is the food is kosher. The pot needs to be kosher because now the pot has meat in it and milk in it, and therefore you can't use that pot. Even though it's a blemished taste, it doesn't matter. The Chachamim said, in other words, this is only after the fact, but what's called lechatchila, somebody cannot take a meat pot that wasn't used for 24 hours and go ahead and cook milk in that pot. You can't. If by mistake you did it, the food is kosher. But the Chachamim said you're not allowed to take a pot that wasn't used for 24 hours and cook dairy in it. You're not allowed to. If somebody by mistake did it, so then the food is kosher, the pot needs to be kosher. So again, if the pot was used within 24 hours of meat and then you cooked dairy in it, the pot is straight, the food is straight. If the pot wasn't used for 24 hours and you cooked milk in that pot, so then the milk is kosher, the dairy is kosher, but the pot needs to be kosher. Okay, that's very simple so far. Now, what happens if somebody, and this happens more often, by mistake, somebody was cooking chicken soup, obviously, which is meat. And by mistake, they took a dairy spoon and mixed the chicken soup. By mistake, they took a dairy spoon and mixed the chicken soup while it was still hot. If it was cold, it's not a problem. Cold does not cause things to absorb. But when it's hot, then things absorb. So if somebody was cooking chicken soup and by mistake, they took a dairy spoon to mix this chicken soup. So what's the din? The din is based on what we said before is as follows. If this spoon was not used for dairy within the 24 hours, if it wasn't used for dairy, then the din is the chicken soup is good because there's no real taste of milk in the spoon. It wasn't used for 24 hours. The spoon obviously needs to be kosher. The spoon needs to be kosher. Why? Because now there's a taste of meat in the spoon. In the dairy spoon, you have a taste of meat. What happens if the spoon was used within 24 hours for milk? So you took this dairy spoon that was used within 24 hours for milk and you stirred chicken soup with it. So then you have a problem. But what's the halacha? If the chicken soup has 60 times the size of the spoon, because again, we don't know how much dairy is in the spoon. And if we don't know how much dairy is in the spoon, we have to assume the whole spoon is dairy. Therefore, if you could put 60 spoons in that chicken soup, the size of the spoon that went inside the pot, 60 times the amount, then the soup is kosher. If it's not 60 times the amount, then the soup is straight, the spoon is straight, the pot is straight, everything needs to be kosher. It's the same concept, just instead of a new pot, it's a spoon. The same thing in reverse. If somebody is making spaghetti, macaroni and cheese, milchik, obviously hot, and somebody goes ahead and stirs it with a meat spoon. With a meat spoon. So again, if the spoon wasn't used for 24 hours, then the spaghetti and cheese is good because there's no meat taste in the spoon to make a problem. So the spaghetti, macaroni and cheese is kosher. The spoon obviously needs to be kosher. If the spoon was used within 24 hours for meat, then again, you need 60 times the amount of the spoon. If you don't have 60 times the amount of the spoon, then the macaroni and cheese is also treif, and you have to kosher the pot, so then everything is treif. So these are very, very practical dinim in the kitchen that can happen any given moment. Therefore, one thing is for sure, and this happens a lot of times, I really don't understand why people do it. You should not have dairy utensils and meat utensils that are similar. You know how many times you get calls that I had a halachic Pyrex and a dairy Pyrex, and they're mamish the same, they look the same, and they got mixed up. I don't know which one's which. Like, well, why do you do that? You're asking for problems, because of course, inevitably, you're going to get them mixed up. Like this, if you know this is this crazy kid, this is red and this is blue, or they're different shapes and different sizes or what, and you know which one's meat and which one's milk. So then the chances of getting them mixed up is far less. If they're very similar, the chances are them getting mixed up is far greater. Okay? Now, let's take another scenario. Okay? These are all very, very practical cases. Until now, we said you're taking a dairy pot and cooking milk, and cooking meat. You're taking a meat pot and you're cooking milk. Okay, that we discussed the whole thing. What happens if somebody is cooking pareve? Somebody is cooking pareve vegetable soup in a meat pot. Okay, they're cooking vegetable soup in a meat pot. The vegetable soup is pareve. The meat pot, if it was used within 24 hours, then it's still meat. So then there's a little bit of meat in the vegetable soup. But what happens? Somebody was cooking vegetable soup in a pot that was used, a meat pot that was used within the last 24 hours. And then they, by mistake, mixed it with a dairy spoon that was also used within 24 hours. So the food is still pareve. I mean, basically, there's no meat or milk in the soup, but you still have a very big problem because the meat taste is still fresh. That's coming out into the soup. You probably don't have 60 times in the soup against the taste of meat in the pot. Now you stirred it with a dairy spoon that was used that day for dairy. So again, there's going to be a problem. If you have 60 times the spoons in the vegetable soup, that means you can put 60 spoons into the vegetable soup and it's covered, everything is fine because it's nullified 1 in 60. But if you didn't have 16, then what you have a big problem. Let me explain what the problem is. The vegetable soup has fresh meat in it from the meat pot that was used within 24 hours. The vegetable soup now also has a fresh taste of milk, which was in the dairy spoon that was used within 24 hours. And you don't have 60 times the amount. So now in this pot, you're going to have meat taste and milk taste all in the part of a vegetable soup. And that's treif because it's a fresh taste. So then it's sad, but the soup is treif, the meat pot is treif, and the dairy spoon is treif because it was all fresh taste of meat and milk from the vegetable, from the meat pot, and from the spoon. Okay. What happens if the spoon wasn't used for 24 hours? So again, you're cooking parva vegetable soup in a halachic pot that was used that day for meat. And now you took a dairy spoon that wasn't used for 24 hours. So now you really don't have a problem at all, because there's no taste of milk in the spoon, it's blemished. So in that case, the pot is good, the soup is good, and the spoon is good. No, sorry, the spoon needs to be kosher. Why? Because the dairy spoon now has a fresh taste of meat in it, because the soup didn't have 60 times the pot which was used that day for meat. But at least the soup is good, at least the pot is good. It's okay, you kasher the spoon, not a big deal. What happens? Okay, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. What happens if you have a meat pot that wasn't used for 24 hours? Cooking vegetable soup. And again, the pot is clean. If the pot is dirty, forget it. You have a clean halachic pot that was used not in 24 hours. And you're cooking vegetable soup in the pot. And then you take a dairy spoon that also wasn't used for 24 hours. Everything is good, because you don't have a real taste of meat. You don't have a real taste of milk. Everything's good. And you don't have to kosher the spoon, because the dairy spoon doesn't have a taste of meat in it that's fresh. It's over 24 hours. So then it's not a problem, then everything is good. If the spoon was used within 24 hours of dairy, so then the soup is good, because the pot wasn't used for 24 hours. Then the soup is good, the pot is good, the spoon needs to be kosher. Now there's another din that needs to be mentioned over here, and this is as follows. I made parva vegetable soup. I made the parva vegetable soup in a meat pot that was used that day for meat, okay, within 24 hours. Can I put cheese into that soup? Yeah, not in the pot. I'm going to take soup from the pot, put it into a plate, a dairy plate. Can I? But you shouldn't put it into a dairy plate. But if you did, it's not a problem. We'll get to that later. So am I allowed to put cheese into that soup? Well, I'll give you another example, which is probably more practical than what we just said. And that is as follows. Somebody cooked noodles, macaroni, in a halachic pot that was used that day. It was used that day for meat. Okay? But when you're cooking is part. Now I take the macaroni out of the pot on a paper plate. Am I allowed to put cheese into that macaroni, into the parva soup? The answer is you can't. Why can't you? Because that soup, that macaroni, still has a taste of fresh meat. It's not going to make you halachic, but this is a very important thing. If somebody cooks vegetable soup in a pot, a halachic pot, a meat pot, that was used that day for meat, but it's clean, and you eat the soup, you cannot eat it together with milk, you cannot put cheese in it, but it doesn't make you halachic. You could put it on, halachically, you could put it on if it was used that day, you could, but that's another reason we're going to get to, not today. But I'm just saying that let's simplify. You put it on a paper plate, in a plastic bowl, disposable. Am I allowed to add cheese to it? The answer is, if it was used that day, for meat, and then you clean and you're cooking vegetable soup, you should not put cheese into that parva food, not into the parva vegetable soup or the macaroni or whatever. You're not allowed to put, you're not supposed to, let's put it up, you're not supposed to put cheese into it. What happens though, if you cook macaroni in a pot that wasn't used for 24 hours for meat? Clean pot, not used for 24 hours, halachic meat pot, and now you're cooking macaroni. So because the pot wasn't used for 24 hours and the pot is clean, very important, the pot is clean, so therefore I would be allowed to put cheese into that macaroni. If the halachic pot was used within 24 hours, I shouldn't. If the pot wasn't used for 24 hours, then I could. I can add cheese to it. And therefore, just expanding this din a little bit in a practical way, if somebody made a parva cake in a meat oven, and again, I'm working only with premises that the oven is clean. If the oven is not clean, you have a lot of problems. You have a clean oven, and I'm baking a halachic oven, a meat oven, and I'm baking a cake, a parva cake, okay? Or cookies, whatever. Am I allowed to have those cookies together with my coffee with milk in it? The answer is again, if the oven was used that day for chicken or meat, so therefore there is a meat taste in the cake, it doesn't make you halachic. If you eat the cake, you don't have to wait 6 hours. But you shouldn't eat it together with milk. You can eat it right before, you can have it right after. Why? Because it's not a real halachic thing. But together, you shouldn't. Halacha says you shouldn't. This explains, by the way, they stopped doing it, but there was a while that OU would have OUDE. OKDE. What does OUDE mean? OUD means it's dairy. Okay, so it's milk. If you keep Chol Yisrael, you can't eat it because it's not Chol Yisrael. But what does OUDE mean? So if you keep Chol Yisrael, you can't use it anyway. But OUDE means it's the food is parv. The food is parv. DE means it was only made in dairy equipment. So what do you mean it was made in dairy equipment? It was made in dairy equipment that was used that day for meat. I'm sorry, in this case, dairy, OUDE. It was used that day for dairy. So therefore, you can't eat this parva creamer, okay, or this ice cream together with meat. You can have it right before. I think if you don't keep Chol Yisrael, you can have it right before, you can have it right after, but you cannot have it together with meat. And that's why they write OUDE. OUDE means really it's parv, but it's dairy equipment. If dairy equipment means you can't eat it together with meat. But let me tell you something else. What happens if you go to a restaurant? And these people are unaware of it, they should be aware of it. Somebody goes to a restaurant, a meat restaurant, and they order French fries. Now they're taking the French fries home. Can they eat that with milk? And the answer is you can't. And it's even worse than that. Unless if the restaurant tells you that these French fries are made in their own oil, that no meat is fried in that oil, then it's parv. But most of the time, They will use that oil to fry schnitzel, to fry other foods. Yeah, and they take off a little bit, the dirt of the schnitzel, but they'll use the same oil. Now, if schnitzel is fried in oil, meat is fried in oil, that oil is real fleishik. It's not like a pot, that's only taste of. When you fry meat or chicken in oil, that oil is 100% fleishik. And therefore, if you're going to buy French fries in a meat restaurant, unless if they tell you differently, that it's 100% powder. But if you don't know, you must assume that the French fries were made in oil that fleishik was made in. And not only that, you're going to have to wait 6 hours after the French fries to be able to eat milk. Because those French fries are really fleishik. Something cooked in a meat pot, even if it was used that day, doesn't make you fleishik for 6 hours. You can have fleishiks right before, right after, or whatever the opposite is, you can have right before, right after. But if it's fried in the oil, there's no way, it's 6 hours. Now, one last din, and then we'll go to Tanya, and that is as follows. What happens if I don't know if the pot was used within 24 hours or not? I don't know. I don't remember. Or somebody else did it. It was somebody else's pot. I don't know. I don't know. So halacha assumes, as the expression halacha goes, stam kelim einay ben yemei. A normal vessel has to be treated that it wasn't used within 24 hours. So if you have a pot and you don't know was it used or not, you assume it wasn't used within 24 hours. If you know it was used, then obviously it was used. So that's the din of, we're not done yet with this whole din. There's a lot to talk about yet. But you can have a meat pot that cooks pariv, but if that pot was used that day for meat, even though it's clean, you cannot have it with dairy. If it was fried in the same oil as meat, then you have to wait 6 hours. So these are all very, very practical dinim. And this is just to get an understanding, and the more we'll learn it, we'll understand it more and more. Once you get the concept of the difference between something used within 24 hours or something not used within 24 hours, whether it's a fresh taste or a blemish taste, then a lot of dinim will fall into place, and they're very logical. But you have to know, when you ask a shaila, you have to know as many details as possible. Because if we learn, based on what we're learning, one slight detail, was it used that day or not, could change the halacha. Everything could be kosher, everything could be trade. So, people need, when they ask a shaila, to try to get as many details as possible of what the halacha is.
Rabbi Shusterman?
Yeah.
Let's ask you. So OUDE means, like if you see ice cream, that would be, the parv ice cream. That would be parv, but that you shouldn't have it with a meat meal.
Yes,
right?
and then also if you keep Chol Yisrael, you can't eat it either.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Because DE means it was made in dairy equipment. Now, we hold from non-Chol Yisrael to Chol Yisrael, you have to kosher the utensils. They don't kosher the utensils. So therefore, you couldn't eat it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Tanya.